right, so good day, everyone. And today we have Dr. Juan Alvez from University of Vermont, and he is here to chat a little bit with us about sustainable agriculture practices. So, Dr. Alvez, I will hand it over to you. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're originally from and things like that.
Hi, Dr. Redhead. Thank you for having me in your program. My background, I'm an agronomist. I graduated agronomist in Brazil. I am originally from Uruguay in South America. I studied my agronomy in Brazil at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. I did my master's and my doctorate at the University of Vermont. My master's was in plant and soil sciences, and then my doctorate was in environment and natural resources at the University of Vermont as well.
Okay, environmental and soil sciences. Yes, something
yes.
up to me because that's what I did for my master's as well.
Yes, and right now I am the pasture program technical coordinator at the Center for Sustainable Agriculture. I hold a research associate faculty appointment, and I teach two courses, forage and pasture management and regenerative grazing. We'll start this fall, 2022. I'm also at the Northeast Pasture Consortium as a PI, principal investigator. And I have a myriad of other memberships, like Food Soils, Vermont Food Cycle Coalition Steering Committee, associations in Uruguay, and collaborations in Brazil as well.
Okay, fantastic. So you definitely a sustainable agriculture sciences, and I like that.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that you work in the Center for Sustainable Ag. Could you give us a brief summary of what types of projects you work on, what you're currently working on right now?
Yes. So the Center for Sustainable Agriculture is going to complete 20 years at the University of Vermont. It's currently hosted under extension, UVM extension. And we have different programs. We have a food systems program. We have pasture and livestock. We have farming and climate change, and we have special projects where we try to collaborate with each other in special projects, related to one of these other topics.
Okay, good. So what would you say, being a sustainable agriculture scientist, right? What would you say would have been the biggest challenge for you to implement this type of agriculture?
Well, in my work, I work within sort of a trilogy of soil health, grazing management, agroforestry, and maybe another topic would be precision agriculture, most lately. The biggest changes I've implemented, I think, were studying how livestock can shape landscape, and also how livestock can have much lower carbon footprint, with possibilities of even being carbon neutral, reaching carbon neutrality, for instance, by way of utilizing pastures more efficiently, by managing animals throughout these pastures in a way that occupies them for very short periods of time and high concentration of animals, and moving these animals every day into a new pasture so that when they come back to the first pasture, enough time has elapsed so that the root system and the pastures have recovered and are ready for these animals to graze again.
Okay, so you're saying that, so you're talking about rotational grazing, basically, that's you're talking about.
Absolutely. So in that sense, I have been measuring how soils react to that management in Vermont, in one region of Vermont. And I have been measuring every 2 years, and I have been tracking how organic matter behaves, how cation exchange capacity behaves, how different macro and micronutrients change over time, and the results are remarkable and speak highly about making changes in the land, a land that has sometimes have had management that have disrupted the soil, the balance of the soil, and it tells you that you can bring that soil back by utilizing animals. So the utilization of animals in high stock density grazing can really restore and revamp the ecology of that soil in a way that will enable you to farm with nature, farm with ecosystem processes, depending less on inputs, external inputs.
Okay. So let me ask you a question here. So we have been, we have been looking at sustainable agriculture over the past years, right? The name has changed like within the last decade from sustainable agriculture to regenerative agriculture, but it's essentially the same principles that are being used, right? What would you say would have changed from the industry, let's say 20 years ago to now? Do you see that a lot more farmers are implementing sustainable agriculture practices, or are they just trying it, not getting the results, and then going back to conventional farming?
That's a large question. So the way we produce food in conventional agriculture is by just in general, right? Maybe there are some cases that don't use this description, but in general, we have to deforest a piece of land, if it's forested. We prepare the soil and we seed, and most of what we seed in those soils are what we know as commodities. In some cases, are row crop or other types of food items. So by utilizing that model that the forests revolves the soil, you start decreasing the amount of carbon in the soil in a way that the soil becomes loses functionality. So you lose different cycles with that approach. Having high amount of organic matter in the soil is precious, because organic matter holds the key to the nutrient cycle, the nitrogen cycle in the soil. There's a positive correlation between amount of carbon and amount of nitrogen assimilable by the plants in the soil, but also the water cycle. The more you revolve the soil, the more you utilize synthetic fertilizers and also pesticides, these soils become less and less reliant on future harvest. And then no matter how much in the future, how much you apply in terms of fertilizer, there'll be a point where soils are not functional anymore, because all the living, because we need to understand that the soil breathes and is a living creature formed by trillions and trillions upon trillions of microorganisms interacting to each other in a way that if you apply sustainable practices, this living macroorganism keeps alive and reproducing and forming new soil, capturing water, infiltrating water at the right rate, capturing emissions from carbon dioxide from the soil to form sugars that are exchanged with in symbiosis with soil microorganisms. So when you break that balance, there are several things that stop happening. And then one thing is the access to oxygen in the soil. The more you plow the soil, the more you extinguish the micropores of the soil, where the exchange of gases happen, and where the root hairs exchange food for minerals, because the microorganisms are the mediators between the mineral side of the soil and the atmosphere through the roots. Okay, so when you achieve that, the soil becomes anoxic. There's no oxygen, and there's very little penetration of water. And when you see, what's the definition of soils? Soils are roughly, 25% water, 25% oxygen, 5% organic matter, and 45% minerals. That 5% organic matter holds the key to the functionality of the soils, and that's what farmers need to understand. When you break the skin of the soil, what you're doing is you're eliminating this 5%, and the soil becomes inert and doesn't function anymore unless you put high levels of synthetic inputs to it.
Right.
Okay. So what we try to do is to work with some principles that guide us and can guide any farmer to sort of a success and sustainability and reliability of their soils and their farming. Okay. One of them is very basic, maintain soils covered at all times, keep plant diversity, keep roots growing all the time, disturb as minimum as possible. Don't disturb the soil at all. Integrate livestock into the soil management by utilizing the principles of grazing management, which are short occupations, long rests, and there are other principles that I can enumerate if there is time. But basically those principles can guide any farmer to farm with nature. As well as, for instance, rotation of areas, rotation of crops, rotations in time and space, etc. Farming is a truly remarkable operation, and is difficult to farm. There's so many variables, and farmers are the ultimate barrier against environmental degradation. So we need to protect farmers.
Right. Exactly, and farmers are also by trial and error become very extraordinary scientists as well. Because science is about trial and error and doing what works best for your production system.
Yes.
Not a one hat fits all, right? But you mentioned livestock, right? So I always wanted to ask you this question. Like, what are the priority efficiency targets for livestock? That would enable us, would enable these systems to meet the demand for livestock products in an environmentally sound, like in a sustainable way.
Right. So in a world, full of the word is not in my mouth right now, but in a world full of not inconsistencies, is not the right word, but oh boy, I think you'll have to edit this, but in a world with a lot of uncertainties,
right.
Where geopolitics in 2022 are playing a big role in compounding these uncertainties, and in a world where we depend so much on fossil fuels for everything from to produce our foods, everything from fertilizers, pesticides, seed production, tractors and everything, we need to question whether a single conflict, which is a major conflict that we have today, can throw everything out of balance and make the price of food and the price of different products that we use to produce food can skyrocket and throw farmers out the window with high cost, and also society paying that price on their end. So in that sense, I believe we've diverted our production thanks to the onset of cheap fossil fuels, we diverted that into producing within a system that allows you to produce quite a lot of food of good quality, but we are so dependent on fossil fuels that if fossil fuels are scarce in the future, we need to be able to find a way to produce with maximizing solar energy in agricultural systems. And that will require not only genetics, but it will require knowing how to manage tools like managing sustainable agriculture, regenerative agricultural practices, which empower the life in the soil and can produce maximizing solar energy, maximizing photosynthesis, and I think that would be the way forward.
Because I always wondered, within the last couple of months, how gas prices have increased. I always wonder whether the consumer would have to pay for that, because I guess if you have a big enough farm, because most sustainable agriculture farms, are relatively small, but if you look at the ones that are on a large scale, using tractors and stuff, because gas is so expensive, would they pass on that cost to the consumer? I always thought about that. I haven't seen any prices in the grocery that's relatively high, but eventually, like I say, if the gas price keeps going up, the consumer, you're right, the consumer will actually pay for that in the long run. So that's to think about.
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, this is the beginning of this conflict, and who knows what can happen. But, some scenarios could be there's a disruption in oil, which will trigger, countries protecting their oil sources, shooting oil, really high, right in probably in the middle of this year, around, middle of the summer. And that will repercute into the food prices, the fertilizer prices, ahead of, maybe in the fall or maybe in at the end of the year. And, some societies are not prepared for these.
Right.
There are some societies that spend, 80% of their salary or more in food, and any 1% changes in food represents more on their budgets, and they are very vulnerable. So by relying on systems that I wouldn't say depart from fossil fuels, because it's really hard to farm without fossil fuels, but relies on systems that depend less on fossil fuels and more on maximizing solar energy. It's a sustainable way of planning the future.
Yeah, I think that's right, because you have to use the energy that's available for us for free, which is from the sun. So that's something to definitely think about in the future.
Absolutely.
So my last question to you, because this interview's been so awesome, is that the younger generation, right? What advice? Because both of us, we teach in universities and we always interact with the younger generation. What advice would you give younger students or agricultural professionals that are actually interested in going into sustainable agriculture farming?
Yeah, so I'd say, remembering everything I said about, how conventional ag works, and how much soil we lose by farming unsustainably, and that there are solutions that we can tap into to, apply the principles of soil health and to produce food in a more meaningful way. The proof is in the numbers, where you can see the growth of organic production, the price of grass-fed, people choosing free range, and choosing more ethical ways of of buying food. I think we need to educate ourselves. There's so much information and also misinformation, but as long as we educate ourselves within the realm of science, we can be sort of, safely pursuing a sustainable future. I'd say, for future farmers, I'd say that it's important to pursue activities that have a market, commodities that have market established already, because establishing a market can take, a long time. Read about, how to farm with nature, how to farm with ecosystem processes, which will make farmers less dependent on external inputs. You will always need external inputs, but there's a balance of, economic sustainability if you have to purchase too many external inputs. And then read about how to maximize or enhance ecosystem processes, the solar energy maximization, how to improve the water cycle on your farm, how to improve your mineral cycle, the minerals that, act in the photosynthesis, succession, communities, etc. Because that's not to say that that's the way to more freedom, economic freedom. It's farming with nature is like help farmers be have a more economic freedom in that way, because you can reduce the costs and increase the revenues.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Dr. Alvez. And for our listeners out there and those who are watching this video, sustainable agriculture is essential. It's very important, and we need to, invest more research money as well as, internship for students to get the full picture. Thank you very much, Dr. Alvez.
Thank you so much, Adam. It was great to be here again in your program, and reach out if you have any questions. My email will be in the video, so you can reach out to me in case you have any questions.
Thank you very much.